Hi everybody, and welcome to Once Upon a Scarf. This channel celebrates the art of the vintage scarf, from luxury silks to bandanas. Here we zoom in close to see the wonderful stories they tell. I am so excited to bring today's scarf to you all because I believe it's an OG Christian Dior that holds a tantalizing mystery. What do I mean by OG? I am certain it was created under his supervision in the incredible years from 1947 to 1957, when he himself was running the atelier. As for the mystery, well, look at it. What the heck is going on here? Stay tuned to find out. I'm the author of 2 classic books on vintage fashion, Secondhand Chic and It's Vintage Darling. I'm a huge fan of the luxury, affordability, and in this case, heartbreaking intimacy behind great vintage scarves. I'm so happy to share their stories with you. I've got a big lift here. First, talking about the great house of Dior in any sort of original way is like setting off for a brisk walk up Mount Everest. There has been so much research, such meticulous archiving, such splendid biographies, and so many layers of brilliant design innovation layered on top of the great man's work. In other words, there is Dior expertise that gets into the seams and unpacks the very patterns of his life work. Nonetheless, I think a scarf like this one offers an incredible insider peek into the man and his working milieu. So please stick with me if you'd like to follow along. Let's look at the basics. I believe this scarf is very old and original to the Christian Dior tenure for 4 reasons. The base silk is a heavy cream, typical of French manufacture of the late 1940s. The edge is eyelash fringe rather than hand-hemmed, again very typical of French foulard of the pre- and post-war era. It is screen-printed without a border, and the house name floats free. Finally, if you take a close look at the S in Christian, its base is squashed flat, as it was in the original house logo. This S got rounded out on scarf designs after they were licensed out to Italian manufacturers in the 1960s. What about the design itself? It's odd, but this is actually another hallmark of very early Dior square scarves. They were not the usual florals or geometrics or painterly scenes we might see in the other great couturier of the era. I did a video on this equally early Dior a while back, an in-your-face, freehand harlequin. Today's scarf shares its hue, a lush, deep violet, and the pigment may in fact be identical, but the imagery is quite a bit different. Or is it? What we see here are repeated abstract faces with a totemic quality. The eyes, nose, and tiny mouths are bold slashes of paint, humorous but distant, set on curlicue wands, with a ruffled fringe around the faces and topped with triangular caps. At first glance, they seem tribal, African perhaps, like this Punu Mukuyi mask from the Gabon. Why would Dior be putting out an haute couture scarf with tribal imagery? Well, we shouldn't forget that before he was a designer, he ran an art gallery, one that had a special concentration in surrealist art and abstract works that were strongly rooted in the art of Africa. So that connection is there. And there's also a tidbit from his official biography that tells that as a young child, he was afraid of an African mask his father had as decor. So that's one explanation for these faces, but I think there's a better one. If you look closely, you start to dwell on the bases, which aren't really typical of tribal masks. What they are typical of is a mask of a different sort. Those handheld ones carried during Mardi Gras, fancy dress, masquerade, and carnivals. In fact, this type of a stick even has a name. It's an opera stick, typified by the curlicue nature, which may replicate twisted ribbons. Another clue lies in the triangular toppers here. This shape of cap was very often worn by a special type of carnival clown known as Pierrot, whose white face you have very surely seen in one form or another. Unlike other scarier clowns, he is famous for being kind of sweet and kind of sad at the same time. So here's a description of the schoolboy Dior by his official biographer Marie-France Pochina. With his oval face, receding chin, and fine hair, he resembled a sad Pierrot. This portrait of a young Dior by artist Paul Strecker captures that sweet sadness beautifully. Dior himself replicated these triangular toppers in a stunning way in his hat designs. The designer famously loved masquerades, costume balls, and dressing up in outlandish regalia, a trait he carried from childhood. Again, Pochina writes, "Nothing sparked Dior's imagination like the joy of the carnival. This joy lasted his entire life." Here's the now famous couturier kicking it up as a nun at a legendary masked ball held in Venice. So, circling back, the idea of a Dior scarf celebrating a masquerade, something the man loved best, becomes less strange the more we understand the man himself. I would go so far as to venture that this scarf and the other early ones, some of which possibly were created by one of Dior's dearest friends, Christian Dior, almost act as inside jokes, as the house was finding its feet in the earliest years. In his biography, Dior is quoted as saying, in the aftermath of the blazing success of his first show in 1947, "There was only one note of melancholy in my grateful paean of triumph. I had to renounce a whole side of my life which had been very dear to me. Henceforth, I had to devote myself in earnest to the role of Christian Dior couturier. I rehearsed it with some success during that brilliant season in Paris, before the fateful moment came when I had to take my new personality on tour." So does this wonderful vintage scarf, which I found on eBay for less than £50, show us the alter ego facade of the great man himself. There is simply not enough evidence online or in the usual Dior sourcebooks to say so for sure, but doesn't it make for a wonderful story? And that's today's tale from Once Upon a Scarf. I'll be taking this kind of deep dive into other scarves from legendary designers that I believe to be OG. I hope you'll come along for the ride. Please press the usual buttons if you'd like to see more.